I'm Nate Elder. I'm a patent attorney currently working from SLW's Minneapolis office. And it's been a little over 2 years since ChatGPT arrived. And for many of us, learning about AI tools has felt a bit like drinking from a fire hose. And so Lucas and I wanted to take some time today to share a little bit about how we've been learning about the tools and how we've been implementing them in our own practice. And hopefully, some of what we share today will be useful to you, whether you're drafting patents or serving some other role within IP. I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera off now, and if you can turn it to slide one, that would be great. Oh, here we go. Okay, so just to set the scene here, I wanted to make sure that we all have a little bit of sort of common understanding of what or how these AI tools generally work. And so in this diagram here, a couple of things that I'm trying to point out here is, so first of all, what we have here is the what we call a context window. You can think of the context window as the working memory for the AI tool. The gray boxes here are the LLM itself and the system prompt. The system prompt is set by your tool provider, and so this is not something that you can control yourself to impact the output that you get from the model. Instead, when you're working with these tools, what we're able to provide as input to generate output is the what we call the context. So you're probably familiar with the idea of uploading files. We generally want to think of that as the context. Um, Whereas a system prompt that's set by the tool provider will often guide the LLM and establish a role for the tool. So a lot of times in the context of these AI tools, you'll guide the model by explaining to the model what its role is. So for example, a common system prompt might say, you are an expert in patent law, or maybe you are an expert in the practice of law. And then the system prompt will provide sort of the do's and don'ts and set the behavior and the policy for the LLM. The instruction you can think of that as a sort of a mini system prompt. So a lot of tools provide the user to establish, um, similar to system prompt. And so it can sort of provide high level instructions for the entire conversation. And then I guess the important thing to keep in mind, and one of the things I'm trying to convey here, is that every time the model generates an output, it's not based on just the user message that you're sending, but it's the entire context window, the system prompt, the context, the instruction. So to the extent that you're trying to get better output from any model, these are the things that you can control, and these are the things that will impact sort of every time the model generates an output. So if we can go to the next slide. So when it comes to these AI tools, there are a variety of sort of legal tools, and there are a variety of IP specific tools, and then there are a variety of sort of general purpose tools. And quite frankly, any of them can work to do certain tasks. I think it's important to understand that all of these vendors are generally using the same models, or maybe not exactly the same models, but they're leveraging models that are provided by the likes of OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, Meta. So I would say that in terms of differentiating between the different tools, the model itself shouldn't be a huge factor. Instead, I would say one of the biggest things that we've sort of noticed in terms of differentiating between the tools, some vendors are trying to provide value by doing some of the prompt engineering for you. And so they have pre-built prompts. And so, for example, the tool might provide just a button that when you press it, the prompt lives behind that button, and so you don't have to think about the prompt. And this is obviously far simpler, so you don't have to learn the prompt engineering aspects of working with these tools. And then a lot of the other tools, of course, are sort of more general purpose tools where you have to understand a little bit about prompt engineering. The trade-off being sort of simplicity versus the power of a custom prompt. Another differentiator is essentially how we go about getting content into that context window that I showed in the first slide. So there's a variety of different user interfaces. Some tools have different sort of integrations so that you can, select files on your operating system to get them into the tool and uploaded and ready to, use with the model. Another differentiator, I think, is sort of the features that relate to how the output of the model can work with sort of the generation of a document and the ability to edit directly within the tool. So some tools are presented as Word add-ons, but even like ChatGPT and Claude provide what's called a canvas, where the output of the model goes directly into a interface that you can then edit directly in the tool. Some web-based tools, you find yourself doing a lot of copy and paste. And just one more point on this is that what we're talking about today is primarily conversational AI tools. There is another class of tool that I think of as sort of a batch processing tool where you can run a prompt against a whole bunch of documents at the same time. But for today's discussion, we're sort of focusing on conversational AI tools. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So for anybody who might be a beginner out there, there are a variety of prompt engineering guides that are available. And from what I have seen, they generally, you can think of the basics of a prompt as including four specific components. And when I say essential here, that's probably probably not exactly accurate in the sense that I find in everyday practice, while I like to think about these four things when I'm prompting, I don't always include, each one. But the basic idea is that when you're prompting, you're providing some overall objective or goal that you're hoping to achieve. You might provide some context. You might cut and paste some context or an example of the output you're hoping to get. You might specify specifically like the type of output and the format. So, for example, a lot of times I find myself saying, draft 3 full and complete paragraphs, something like that. If you don't do that, a lot of times the models do provide either bullet point lists and numbered lists and output that has a lot of like section headings. So, to avoid that, you can specify explicitly sort of the desired output and format. And then typically the last thing that I would do is sort of have a call to action. So you've kind of you sort of provide the instructions and then you say, now do it, if you will. If you're new to prompting, two things that I would suggest. So there's a concept that I think of as inverse prompting. One thing you can do is sort of so like in the context of drafting a patent application, you might provide a model, 3 or 4 paragraphs, and then ask the model to generate the prompt that would result in those three or four paragraphs. So this is a very quick way to sort of get an understanding of what the model is expecting in terms of a prompt to generate specific types of output. Another trick is to simply have the AI write the prompt itself, or in the case of an instruction. There are custom GPTs, for example, on on ChatGPT, that are specific to doing exactly this. So you can select that particular model that has a specific instruction that tells the model to create user prompts and or system prompts. So that's a good way to generate a user prompt or an instruction. Obviously, if you come across a good prompt, it's always wise, or if you have a very specific prompt, I would highly recommend that you save and reuse that prompt. And the next slide, please. And so this is just an example of the type of prompt that I might use. And this is in the context of maybe drafting a patent application where I want the model to generate a brief description of the figures section for a patent application. So the first thing I would obviously do is make sure that I have the correct, content in the context window. So in this case, I usually would have a set of figures that I've completed, and I will create a PDF and upload it to the tool. And then I basically ask the tool to generate a brief description of the figures. And I will cut and paste an example from a different patent application. And so this is just an example of kind of how I would use those four components of a prompt in actual practice. And with that, I'll hand it over to Lucas.
Thanks, Nate. Again, my name is Lucas Hjelle. I work with Nate here in the Minneapolis office. These next few slides will be tips for that are a little bit more specific to what we've done. So some specific examples we'll walk through. The next three slides will be about context engineering. Then there'll be some slides about prompt engineering, and then finally some patent specific tips. So we'll start here with context engineering, this context bleed. Early LLMs had this issue with context bleed, where if you had a document that was uploaded into your context window, notably an office action, then that would be part of that context window that Nate showed in that first slide, and it could be used to provide answers for things, even when you don't want the answer to come from the office action. So a good example is if the office action rejected your claims and you had a series of one or more references used to reject your claims, then that if you asked the LLM what is whether or not that reference teaches this feature, then it may incorrectly import the answer from the office action, which may characterize the reference as actually teaching it. So essentially, this would be as if the LLM would be arguing the examiner's position about the claim scope or teaching of the references. So this was an issue that we identified early on, where that office action kept forming the basis of a lot of the subsequent responses. And our solutions come next. Next slide, please. So one of the solutions is addressing this through coarse context manipulation. This is where we're able to modify what's within your context window. A great way to do this is to start by asking the LLM to summarize the documents. And then that helps to define the context window and then tells you a little bit about what it thinks it can see. Maybe it provides names for the documents so you can reference them and maybe exclude them later. This coarse context manipulation is best implemented through being able to select and deselect relevant files. So if you have the ability in your interface to select files or deselect them, that works very, very well. We found in other cases, you may not have the ability to deselect. So when in doubt, you can always start a new chat session and then perhaps attach the files that you want to the new chat session. And then you're starting from scratch without the possible context bleed from a office action, for example. Next slide, please. So another way to address this is to work through the exact context window that you do have and manipulate it with care using just what is provided in your new prompt. So as Nate mentioned, you have your very large context window that includes your system prompt, user-provided context, instructions, previous messages, responses, and then your current message and response. The idea here is to focus it just on your current prompt and provide that with all the information that you need. Here it's using all caps. That's not meant to indicate that I'm shouting at you. That's actually a strategy that works quite well with LLMs. Here, if you use that phrase, for example, response strategy, and leave that in all caps, and then reference pending claims in all caps, and then cut and paste below that response strategy, then paste that strategy, pending claims, and then maybe paste your first independent claim, and then ask it to draft a proposed amendment based on these specific inputs. Then it focuses just on those without having to worry about whether or not it's finding the right claim document or strategy in a previous response. It essentially focuses its attention squarely on what you're providing it at the moment. Just as a practice tip, if you're trying to enter a carriage return, shift return is your friend. That way it doesn't actually get submitted to the LLM. It becomes a new paragraph, a new line. You can also use bullet points, Cornell style numbering. Your Cornell style numbering works especially well because then it can refer back to a specific section. So if you find that your interface is providing very long responses, you can say, use Cornell style numbering in your responses. And then later on, you can ask it to implement the strategy described in section 1.2.1, for example, and then it will refer back to that specific section. So it's very good at identifying these, numbering things, and then tying back to those specific points in the previous responses. Next slide, please. So the prompt quality is something Nate alluded to before in that essential components of every prompt. Here, we just wanted to identify or highlight the differences between these draft claims. If you casual prompt could be just draft claims, and if you put that as your input, you're going to get a not very helpful output. But the more you develop your prompt, the better your output will be. So an intermediate prompt could be to draft patent claims relating to the following invention disclosure features, and then you paste in whatever those features are. The advanced prompt is more about that those essential components Nate mentioned. You identify the role. You say you're an expert patent attorney, and then you identify the context and their tasks, maybe the sub-steps, carefully analyze the disclosure, identify novel features, and then draft a set of method patent claims that cover those features. So this provides it with all those different components of that prompt that enable it to know who it is and how to draft things, and then what to focus on, and to provide and what output you're looking for it to provide. Also, to refer back to what they mentioned, using an LLM to draft a prompt is a great technique. ChatGPT has always been great for this. If you don't remember or don't want to, draft this entire advanced prompt from scratch, just ask another chatbot to draft it for you. Say, draft an LLM prompt that will analyze an invention disclosure document and draft patent claims. And it'll provide you with one or more prompts that'll do this for you. And it does a great job of tailoring it in a way that the LLMs respond to very accurately. So that can improve things as well. Next slide, please. So this tip here and this icon, by the way, these icons were drafted by a version of ChatGPT, so I apologize for the silliness of the cartoon. The car on the rock is intended to refer to this story. I had a friend who was driving along. There was a rock. They were driving with someone, and they told the driver to drive around the rock. So the person positioned the vehicle so that both tires were on either side of the rock. They drove over the rock. It hurt the car. It was an expensive misunderstanding. Later on, they said, "Why did you drive over the rock?" And they said, "I didn't. I drove so the tires were around the rock, and so the tires didn't drive over the rock." In retrospect, what would have been better is if they provided affirmative instructions, drive around the rock. And LLMs tend to respond very well to this too. So for example, if you tell it to don't use long sentences or extraneous information, it may try to do its best, but it responds a lot better if you say something like, redraft this using short declarative sentences, focus on describing and detailing technical features, or maybe asking it to avoid things like adverbs, adjectives, or intensifiers. But keep in mind, these LLMs include an unfathomable amount of information. So if you're asking it to not do something, then you're asking it to exclude a tiny fraction of everything that it has within its abilities. But instead, if you tell it what you do want, then it narrows it dramatically to the types of responses or the types of LLM paragraphs, responses, formats that you actually would find useful. So do use these affirmative instructions whenever prompting LLMs. Next slide, please. So this example prompting is the intent here is to find the best way to use your inputs and outputs. The LLMs also respond very well to providing examples. So if you provide it with an example, say from a previous office action response, you can say, redraft the previous response, whatever the LLM just provided to you, the information, using the organization and tone of the following example template. Or better still, you can provide it, if you're asking it to redraft something, with an example input, an example output below, again, using those all caps to identify those subheadings. And then here we're showing that the example input could be in a sentence format, whereas maybe you want your claims in this standard claim indenting colons, the standard claim format. So when you provided examples of your input and the output, it's better able to redraft things on your behalf. Next slide, please. It's important to distinguish between when you're requesting a set of text that you're providing, whether it's to redraft that or use it as a template. So let's say you have a previous office action response and you're taking a paragraph from that. If you just say redraft the following paragraph to clarify the technical features, maybe what you mean to say is that, using everything we've discussed so far, draft something in this, like this paragraph. What the LLM is going to do is interpret that paragraph you provide as new information. So it's going to tell you maybe these references aren't relevant because they weren't in the office action, for example. So instead of that, it's better to say redraft the following response, redraft the previous response using the organization and tone of the following example paragraph template, paste in your paragraph, and then it will use that tone and organization to provide something that's a lot closer to your intended work product. Next slide, please. And then for my last slide here, this claim drafting tips. These are just general tips that we found to be especially effective in drafting claims. So instead of saying something like just draft claims, we found that this chain of prompt tends to work particularly well for drafting claims, or at least getting you to a good starting point. The idea here is you have these 4 sub-bullets are different steps that you could use in your drafting claims, where you read the disclosure, identify this technical problem. That's one input, and then it provides you with its output. And then after that, you say, identify the technical solution that addresses the technical problem. And that harkens back to the previous response and is able to develop that technical solution. Using that technical solution then for the third prompt, it broadens that based on the disclosure documents, and then identify fallback positions for narrow or dependent claims. So this building of a claim set, or at least this drafting of a claim set using this chain of prompt with separate prompt inputs, we found really provides a better set of initial claims. You'll still have to edit them, of course, but at least gets you to a much better starting point. You can also use your LLM to draft intermediate scope and narrow scope independent claims. For example, if you wanted, if the first claim set that it provides is fairly narrow, as they often are, you can ask it to broaden it out a little bit. You could also ask it to diversify the claim types. Maybe your system claims are narrow and you want your method claims to be broader. So you can ask it to modify those based on what it's provided. But do use this chain of prompt technique. This is these multiple step prompts do provide a much better output consistently. And with that, I'll turn it back to Nate for an additional patent specific tip.
Thanks, Lucas. So I just wanted to share a couple of tips that I've learned with respect to inventor interviews. So first of all, a lot of times when I'm asked to draft a patent application, I receive an email and it's got some disclosure material. So the first thing I do is I upload those materials to my tool, and I immediately sort of do some research to understand what the task is. So I can ask the the AI tool about what is in the document that I've received, and sort of get an initial understanding of what I'm up against and what the invention is all about. And then one of the things I like to do is based on what the document is, I'll ask the AI tool to create a list of 5 or 10 questions that I might ask the inventors to expand on, what might not be present in that document that they sent over. So that's just a good way to prepare for an inventor interview. And prior to AI, I always wanted to have an audio recording of the discussion that I had with the inventor. Now I don't care so much about the audio recording, but what I really want is that text-based transcript, because when I'm drafting a patent application, I'll upload that transcript and use that as context in the context window. And so because I know that I'm going to do that, a couple of things that I do during the interview, at least a little bit differently than I might have previously. So the first one is that I have a couple of clients where I have to, after the interview, fill out and submit a form. I used to perhaps do that during the call, but now I simply ask those questions and get the administrative data, whether it be the information I need to file the patent application in terms of, country of citizenship, residential address, but also sometimes some very client specific questions that I have to have for filling out a form. Rather than waste the inventor's time actually filling out the form while I'm having the meeting, I just ask the questions and then later I can go back and sort of query my transcript and fill out that form. It just saves a little bit of time with the inventor. Another thing that I'm very careful to do now is I know I'm going to use the transcript later to sort of inquire about what the point of novelty is. So I'm very deliberate in asking the question, what is the point of novelty to the inventor? Or, and when I say deliberate, this may seem obvious, but what I'm trying to do is get into the transcript the word or phrase novelty or point of novelty so that when I then ask the model to propose an independent claim that includes the point of novelty, I'm not relying on the model to intuitively understand what novelty means because we all sort of understand that, but if you have text that is appearing in your transcript around the phrase or words novelty, point of novelty, you're going to get a slightly better answer, hopefully. At least that's the idea. And then I do the same thing if I have a case that might be challenging with respect to 101. I'm very deliberate about getting a discussion on the record that involves, the technical problem and technical solution, being sure to specifically use the word technical and technical problem so that is in the transcript. And obviously, this helps not only for drafting the application, but if I'm, doing prosecution and I still have that transcript, I can, quickly go back and, query the transcript to have a better understanding of what the point of novelty was in the first place. Anyway, just a couple of tips for interviews. Next slide, please. So one of the things that I have learned to do is I dictate all of my prompts. I started out using the dictation tool that's provided on my operating system. I'm a Mac user. That's pretty good, but there are a couple of LLM-based dictation tools that have really been game changers. And so two examples of those are WhisperFlow and Aqua Voice. I'm not necessarily plugging either one of them. They're both great. But the nice thing about these tools is that it understands the context with which you're doing your dictation. So for example, if you pause, it will automatically insert a comma if there should be a comma there. So for example, if you're dictating an email and you say, hi John, and then you pause, it will automatically put that comma in. It understands punctuation. There's a lot of configuration things that you can do to sort of speed up your dictation. So for example, you can specify like when you say my email address, it'll actually insert your email address. It's excellent for prompting, but it's also good just for email drafting or document editing. So I see we're almost out of time here, so let's go to the next slide quickly here. And so I have a number of prompts that I kind of think of as sort of poor man's integration. So I use a web-based LLM tool that does not have very good integrations with sort of third-party applications. And so there's a number of prompts that you can set up. And these are a few of the prompts that I actually save that help you sort of automate things. So for example, I have a prompt that will analyze an office action and extract from that the examiner's telephone number. And it will then format and present the telephone number as a selectable link. So I can simply, I will execute the prompt and then I can simply, hit the link and it will automatically use the operating system to figure out what my default communications application is for telephone calls. And so it's a very quick way to, for example, just call an examiner before an interview or something like that. I have another one where it will analyze an office action and provide links to the cited references via Google Patents. That's a very good way to sort of easily get your PDFs to put them into your context window. I have another one that does emails. So you can actually create a link that when selected will automatically populate the recipient, subject matter, and body of a mail within your default mail application. So those are just a couple of, again, what I call poor man integration techniques for prompting. And I think we're out of time. And so thank you for attending. Hopefully you learned something. If you have any questions, obviously, please feel free to reach out to Lucas or myself.